Good day, everyone. My name is Ganapathi, and in this presentation, I will discuss how Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative can be applied to the ethical issue of falsifying information at work. The scenario I selected focuses on employees or corporations manipulating workplace data for personal or organizational benefit. This topic is highly relevant today because professional environments depend heavily on honesty, accountability, and trust. Through this presentation, I will explain Kant's deontological ethics and evaluate this scenario using three formulations of the categorical imperative: the universal law formulation, the humanity formulation, and the kingdom of ends of formulation. I will also connect this discussion to a real-world example, the Satyam Computer Services scandal in India. So let's get on to the next slide. So before going into the scenario and all, let's dive into the Kant's moral philosophy, which is called deontology, which comes from Greek word deon, meaning duty. Unlike utilitarianism, which judges actions based on consequences, Kant believed morality should be based on duties and rational principles. According to Kant, an action is morally right when it is done because it is the right thing to do, not because it produces beneficial results. This means that even if dishonesty creates good consequences temporarily, it is still morally wrong. If it violates moral duty, can believe that morality is grounded in reason and universal principles that apply equal to everyone. He introduced the categorical imperative as the central moral law that rational people should follow. This ethical approach is especially important in professional environments because organizations rely on trust, transparency, and ethical responsibility. So, moving on to the next slide. So, deontology, which is ethics without expectations. So, this one explains about mainly deontology that argues some actions are inherently right or wrong. In other words, morality is not determined by outcomes alone. For example, lying is even wrong, even if it produces short-term benefits. Second, Kant introduced the concept of the categorical imperative. A categorical imperative is an unconditional moral rule that applies universally to all rational people. Unlike hypothetical rules, which depend on personal goals, categorical imperative apply in every situation. Kant's central claim is that morality should not depend on emotions, personal interest, or convenience. It instead, moral decisions should be guided by rational duty and universal ethical principles. This idea became highly relevant when discussing workplace honesty because employees may justify unethical actions by focusing on benefits such as profit, promotion, or job security. Kant would reject these such justifications because moral duties cannot be ignored for personal gain. And moving on to this next slide. So, in this case, an employee falsifies workplace data such as inflating sales figures or changing progress reports to make performance appear better than really it is. Then, so what's the motivation? Why he should do that? He wants to protect his job, receive a promotion, avoid criticism, or help the company maintain a positive image. But the ethical problem is much deeper than simply breaking workplace policy. Then really, falsifying information damages professional trust and creates misleading decisions within organizations. Managers, investors, customers, co-workers rely on accurate information when making important decisions. So I have also added a link to a real-world example, which is Satyam Computer Services scandal that happened in India for falsifying the information, and then which involved an $1.5 billion scandal. To the next slide, which is the first formulation of Kant's ethics. the universal law. So what does it mean? So Kant states that we should act only according to principles that we could rationally want everyone else to follow as universal laws. The question here is very simple. What would happen if everyone behaved this way all the time? So in this scenario, the maxim being tested is it is acceptable to lie on workplace reports whenever it protects my personal interests. Kant argues that moral rules must be universal and logically consistent. If a rule cannot function when universally applied, then it is morally unacceptable. This formulation forces individuals to move beyond personal convenience and ask whether their behavior could reasonably become a universal ethical standard or society. So, application of this formation formulation law. So, what happens here? So, when we apply the universal law to the test, the action immediately fails. Imagine a world where every employee falsifies reports whenever it benefits them. In such a world, nobody would trust workplace data anymore. Financial statement, progress reports, professional communication would lose all credibility. And Kant calls this contradiction in conception. This maxim destroys the very system and makes the action possible in the first place. So therefore, falsifying workplace information cannot be universalized. To the next slide. The principle of humanity, the second formulation of Kant ethics. So Kant argues that we must always treat humanity as an end in it itself and never merely as a means to an end. This means people should never be manipulated, exploited, and treated like tools for achieving personal goals. Every rational person has intrinsic value and deserves respect. When someone lies or deceives another person, they interfere with the person's ability to make informed decisions. In this way, deception disrespects human dignity. To the next slide. So, the application of the formulation tool, in which managers, investors, clients, co-workers depend on accurate information to make rational decisions. When an employee provides false information, they manipulate the decisions of others for personal or organizational advantage. For example, manager may provide poor strategies, investors may lose money, and co-workers may face unfair consequences because they relied on dishonest information. This deception removes the autonomy of others because they deny truthful information needed for rational decision making. Kant would argue this behavior reduces people to instruments for achieving personal goals instead of respecting them as individuals with dignity and rational agency. So, moving on to the next slide, the formation 3 of the categorical imperative of Kant ethics, the kingdom of ends. So, in this, Kant asks us to imagine a rational moral community where every individual acts according to universal ethical law and respects one another equally. In this ideal community, each person acts as both creator and follower of moral law. Ethical rules are designed to support cooperation, trust, fairness, and mutual respect. The important question here is whether the action contributes to or damages a rational moral society. So, how this one works? Systematic corruption. Lying introduces corrosive now. Then it moves on to illegitimate legislation. You can legislate a rule that destroys the very community. Isolation, not cooperation. The act serves the individual from the personal community, professional community, rather than strengthening it. So this is what happened. The Satyam scandal damaged investor confidence in Indian corporate governance due to falsifying information. So finally, Kantian verdict. So as a summary, we can see that fails logics, uses people, at last it destroys trust. So final conclusion is that Kantian ethics clearly shows that falsifying information at work is morally wrong regardless of the consequences. So this is the reference page, and these are the academic sources used throughout this presentation. The primary source is Kant's groundwork of metaphysics of morals, which introduces the categorical imperative. I also use the course test tool or chapter on Kantian deontology by Joseph Cranach. And thank you for the time.